Let me introduce myself too. I'm Michael Brower. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights New Jersey. Disability Rights New Jersey is our state designated protection and advocacy agency. We advocate for people with disabilities both at the individual level, providing legal services, and at systemic levels, addressing all different kinds of barriers that prevent people with disabilities from living as fully included members as they should be in our communities. I want to kind of pass the virtual microphone around because Disability Rights New Jersey, even though I'm hosting this evening, is a small portion partner in the Pinelands is for Everyone project, which is why we're here. The Pinelands is for Everyone, the title pretty much says everything you need to know about it. There are barriers to full access for people with disabilities of all kinds when it comes to accessing the Pinelands. And when we're talking about the Pinelands, or even just outdoor space generally in New Jersey, it's one of the great things that we have in a state that's so densely populated that we have millions of acres of, whether that's the pines, whether that's the shore, whether that's, we were just looking at some examples of county and local parks. Outdoor spaces that I'm sure many of us through the pandemic have really come to value even more as places where we could go to decompress, to get outside, to have outdoor visits with friends or family. And when there's barriers that prevent some of us from using them, that's a problem. And the Pinelands is for Everyone project is designed to gather information about some of those barriers, find accessible sites, and really create a grassroots movement that will, into the future, make sure that people with disabilities of all kinds can access and enjoy the outdoor spaces that some of us take for granted. With that, I want to pass off, because the lead partner in this project is the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. I'm just going to pass off the virtual mic there so they can introduce.
Hi, my name is Becky Free, and I am pleased to be here this evening on behalf of the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Like Michael said, we are a nonprofit organization, and a huge part of our vision for the Pinelands is that everybody has access to its resources. Nature is such a critical part of the world we live in and provides stress relief and improves quality of life. And we're really delighted to work with Disability Rights New Jersey and Hopeworks Camden to help do what we can to make this an easier process for all people, no matter the challenges they face. Thank you so much, Michael.
Great. And I think we have Louise from Hopeworks.
Yes, well, I'm involved in two different ways. I live in the Pinelands, I live in Browns Mills, but also work with this amazing organization called Hopeworks. Hopeworks, we work with young people, teaching them the technologies. In my case, I'm the director of the Geographic Information System program. We got involved with the Pineland Preservation Alliance doing an evaluation of what's already out there from accessibility, land use, specifically agricultural areas, and demographics in general. So we're going to be working on a big project, evaluating this in the whole area of the Pinelands.
Great, and thanks so much, Louise, for being here with us tonight and for everything Hopeworks is doing to contribute to this project.
No, it's my pleasure, believe me.
I'll take this opportunity to go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Eric Husta. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation for the County of Atlantic. I'm very excited to be here tonight, and would like to take this opportunity to thank our hosts for the opportunity to participate in tonight's discussion. So being a public employee working in county government offers a firsthand look at many different improvement styles and projects in parks which deal with accessibility and inclusivity as well. So when I was invited to participate in the meeting tonight, I took the opportunity to create a brief slide presentation.
So we put together a few slides to just talk about that process of, the factors that influence the when, the why, and how we make those decisions. And the first is obsolescence, or things just basically reach the end of their useful lifespan. So provided this example on the right which is the Estell Manor Park Nature Center. And you can see there were various pours of exposed aggregate concrete, some areas where some of that had begun to exfoliate. And what you can't see behind the plants is that some of the foundation had given way and was compromised in several areas. So the Division of Facilities came through and decided to put in a new ramp system with new railings, but they went above and beyond a little bit and put in some touch pads on the exterior and the interior of the building that allow push button access, ingress and egress. But the really neat feature is that there are these 2 presence meters where all one really needs to do is approach the door from the interior, and both will open for a hands-free egress outside. The second factor is just plain good timing. So this is our Gaskell Park gazebo in downtown Mays Landing that was in need of some woodwork and painting and some trim work and just general refreshing. Gets lots of uses. Lots of weddings come through here, yoga, outdoor exercise classes, graduations, birthday parties, etc. So when this hit the slate and was supposed to be upgraded, we took that opportunity to enhance the accessibility. So there were some ADA compliant parking spots here that were refreshed, and you can see the gazebo here in the background. So we made sure the route was accessible and in good shape, but also took the opportunity to place a new accessible ramp around the backside of the gazebo with railings and then some grippable handrail as well that ultimately bring you to the finished grade of the gazebo here once you make this turn. The third factor is changes in requirements or expectations, and this is probably the least desirable, meaning that you wouldn't want to wait until you're mandated to make the change and caught off guard and required to do so. But in the last 10 years, we thought of 2 examples. The first is the Department of Justice in September of 2010 released regulations and new rules on other power-driven mobility devices, which forced counties and other agencies to take a hard look at their trails and do an assessment to determine which of those could support these different or alternative other power-driven devices and which may not for various reasons, whether it be the surface or the grade or the ecology of an area might not support that mobility device. And the second was the signing of Jake's Law in August of 2018, which basically incentivizes counties and agencies like ours to build inclusive playgrounds. So we did so, and the first playground that we finished with an inclusive structure was just completed in December, and this is our Picnic Area 1 in Estell Manor Park that shows an accessible route, a unitary pour-in-place safety surfacing, and then a ramp system that gets you basically to 100% of the play components in the structure. So once we identify these opportunities, how do we realize them? And it's usually one of 2 ways. It's either part of a larger project, or alternately a smaller project. But if it's part of a large-scale project, it allows you to pool your sources of funding. So we are able to take things like open space funds and couple them with grants and accomplish things that would have been unattainable by themselves. Some examples of this would be our greenhouse in Estell Manor Park, where we propagate plant material that's used throughout the county at various locations, but we also used it as an outdoor classroom. So at one point, we were participating in a ROID grant, which is a Recreational Opportunities for Individuals with Disabilities grant that was administered through the Department of Community Affairs. And we did so with the Atlantic County Special Services School District to create an outdoor atmosphere where students could come in and learn about horticulture in our greenhouse. So we used some of that ROID money to upgrade this greenhouse and build a small one over on the other side here that you can't see. But it gave us an opportunity that would have been otherwise unavailable to create an outdoor classroom space for use by the school district. The second example shown here on the right is Lake Lenape East Park on the eastern shore of Lake Lenape in Mays Landing, where Facilities again was redoing some of the facade work on the catering hall, but also took the opportunity to couple that with another project where they added and retrofitted some of the ramp systems that were already in place, but made some accessible routes to 3 out of the 4 major entrances to the building. So again, coupling one project with another to increase the scale for the sake of efficiency. Alternately, the second way to accomplish these or realize these goals is as a standalone project. So 2 small standalone projects that happened in parks that I think were successful examples would be this the picture on the left shows and the center picture show a permeable, 100% porous trail system that's ADA compliant, accessible, and it would also give us the opportunity to test some of this material to see how what the longevity was, how it held up over time, and whether we'd want to do more of it in the future. So back here behind these trees is one of our group campsites that has a big pavilion with concrete floor. We made this trail that connects that to this platform here adjacent to our Smith Ireland Cemetery. And if you turn 180 degrees around, you're looking down that boardwalk at the connector or the spur that takes you to our 1.8 mile already accessible boardwalk that goes from the Artesian Well powerhouse to the all the way up to the Nature Center. So there are just a couple of basic principles that we subscribe to on a daily basis, and the theme really here is to be flexible and ready to act. So the two photos on the left again are just details of what we already talked about, because we thought it was a great example of this pinpoint flexibility where we were awarded a 2011 trail grant, and we took the opportunity to not only test strip some of this porous material, but also create a more accessible route from our pavilion down to the cemetery and then ultimately down to the boardwalk. And the two photos here on the right are Lenape East, and they show some of the site furniture that we were given the opportunity to purchase. So instead of making a percentage of that site furniture ADA compliant, we made every picnic table we bought compliant with the accessible wing on each and every table we purchased. And some of the standalone 4-sided tables that are in the park have the one bench missing, so that there's a more accessible route to that side of the table throughout the park system as well. So much of the furniture in that park is ADA compliant right from the get-go. So again, the idea to be proactive and stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, is what we talked about a little bit. So whether we're talking about the Nature Center ramp upgrades, the gazebo at the Gaskell Park, or even the play structure at Estell Manor Park with the unitary surfacing, we do these things because the opportunity presented itself, and so we took advantage of it. But I included this last photo for two reasons. One is to remind us that we can always do more, and simply never stop looking for new opportunities to upgrade what we have. But also, it brings up the idea or theme of future proofing. So this staircase we inherited with the property when it was purchased takes you down to the basement level of the catering hall, which currently isn't accessible to employees or the public. It's locked off and it's not used, but the county still is electing to move ahead and redo this stairwell and add an accessible route to the outside that brings you to the basement level or the lake level of the catering hall, so that if we ever decide to use that in the future, it's already done and in place and ready to be utilized. So I think that theme is worth ending on, that to future proof and to always look for those opportunities when they present themselves. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here and give the presentation quickly. And if anyone's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
That's great. Thanks so much, Eric, for putting that presentation together for everybody. I think it's a fantastic introduction to our town hall this evening. This isn't just to listen and think and talk, though those are important elements, and listening at a town hall is obviously the key reason that we're all here and that you're all here, because at the end of the day, we do want to hear from you. But at the end of this project, our goals are to both produce a written report that can inventory some of the best things that can be done to reduce or lower or even totally remove barriers to accessibility, and also to generate, as Louise was just referring to, a great mapping directory where people who want to access the outdoors can find a reliable, up-to-date way to find where can I go, what's accessible, and what does accessibility mean, right? Because for some people, accessibility means I could use my wheelchair. And for some people, accessibility means I need visual aids. Or for some people, that means I need to make sure I'm in a sensory accessible environment, depending on your disability, right? Everybody's different. Everyone has differing abilities. With that, I want to move. We've had a great introduction from Eric. I want to move into a little bit of housekeeping. It's a bit delayed, but it's important all the same. And first of all, you're all on mute if you're a guest tonight for now. That is going to change in just a few minutes. We'll be able to give you all the power to push the mute button, which looks like that microphone up on your screen. If you're on a computer or a tablet or a phone, that's going to be on the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. And when it's time for that discussion, don't worry, I'll let you know. When it comes time for our discussion, it's a relatively large group. We have 71 participants tonight. That being said, should be no problem. If you have something to say, we want to hear from, again, whether it's success stories, problems you found, things you just want to share, questions to ask. We don't promise to have a bunch of answers for all of your questions. But I do want to make sure that, if you have something to say, it's a good time tonight to start that rolling. We'll be having more town halls in the future that we'll be announcing. So if for some reason you don't get a chance, we've run out of time, don't sweat it. We'll have more opportunities in the future. By default, we have closed captioning on. If you find that distracting, there is a button. If you follow my little arrow on your screen over to the bottom right-hand part of your menu, there's a CC button that you can push to turn that off. We also have American Sign Language interpretation live. That should be pinned to your screen so that everybody can participate. One last piece of housekeeping is the chat box. If at any point during the evening you have something to say, you have a resource you want to share, a question to kind of pose to the group, the chat box is open, and you should feel free at any point of the evening to go ahead and put thoughts, questions, concerns, what you have to share with us in that chat box. If you don't feel comfortable going on video, or if you're on the phone, speaking up on the phone. And that brings me to one very, very micro housekeeping measure. If you are calling in, and I see that we have a few folks joining by the phone, once it's time to have discussion, *6 on your touch-tone phone will unmute you, and *6 on your touch-tone phone will remute you when you're done. So when that time comes, feel free to unmute yourself and just speak up, hey, I've got something to say, and we'll stop and listen. All right, that's my housekeeping. If any problems, just drop it in the chat and one of us will be able to help you. We talked about the Atlantic County Parks with a few good examples of exactly what we're talking about, right? Changes to outdoor spaces and park systems that can make them more accessible for people with different kinds of disabilities. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're looking to hear. So that should help inspire, because of the good work that's been done in Atlantic County. I think it should inspire our conversation tonight. And it's really great to see some of that. I think the photos tell a story, seeing boardwalks, seeing permeable surfaces, seeing accessible tables, and thinking about the future, not necessarily responding to a problem, but getting ahead of the problem, and making sure that everybody's welcome to use those spaces is something that we're looking kind of as ideal. After that, and next up, I'll talk a little bit, since I'm a lawyer, I really can't help myself, to talk about accommodations laws. I'm not going to bore you with that for too long, though. I see that the clock is already ticking, so I want to move right through that. It'll be brief, I promise, just enough to kind of inform our discussion. We've been inspired. We should also be informed. And then we're going to move right along to discussion. And that's the time where we're going to open up the microphones and cameras. And at that point, we'll just ask again if everyone could just respectfully, kind of speak up when you're ready. You can put yourself on camera, take off your mute, and speak up. And we'll want to hear from as many people as we possibly can tonight. That's the point of our town hall. All right, moving right along. It wouldn't be a discussion about accessibility if we didn't talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you are completely unfamiliar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's not a whole lot that you need to know for our purposes, but there's a couple things that you do need to know. The ADA, as it's commonly called, is split into different titles, and every title covers a different part of the world that needs to be made accessible. The basic principle of the Americans with Disabilities Act is that it's illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities. And discrimination comes in a lot of different forms. And that could be anything from outright discrimination. We don't serve people who use wheelchairs here, right? The old-fashioned explicit kind of discrimination. To just exclusion because, for example, there's stairs at the front of a government building and there's no ramp or elevator to get in. So wheelchair users couldn't access the government building. That excludes people from the government building, and therefore it's discrimination. So Title I covers employment, discrimination at the workplace. Title II covers government, and that may be things like county parks, town halls, federal buildings, any kind of government program, not just the physical spaces. So things like benefits programs like Medicaid or food stamps need to be accessible to people with disabilities under Title II. Title III is places of public accommodations that are privately owned. Restaurants, bars, hotels, privately owned parks for tonight's conversation. Nature reserves, places like that. Title IV and Title V, we're not too worried about. That's telecommunications and other kind of the miscellaneous stuff. I'm not going to spend any time because I don't want to take any more time away from our conversation tonight. And when we're talking about discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act and in New Jersey, it's good to add to that the law against discrimination, which is our state level law that basically does the same thing and protects people with disabilities among many other protected groups of people from discrimination or exclusion from the community. When we talk about public spaces, whether they're government-owned public spaces or privately owned public spaces, we're usually talking in terms of reasonable accommodations. And a reasonable accommodation can be anything from accessible parking, accessible entryways, and pathways, which, I have up on the screen a picture of the universal sign for accessibility. It's that blue square and kind of like a stick figure in a wheelchair. I also have up on the screen a picture of the steps to the Supreme Courts of the United States. If you look at those set of stairs, they're iconic, right? They come with big marble columns. They're white. There's dozens of stairs. If somebody were, using a walker or using a wheelchair to ambulate, to walk around, those would be a pretty intimidating set of stairs before you even get into the Supreme Court to have the court hear your case. And then on the left, I've got a picture of somebody reading a Braille book. Accommodations come in all different forms and ways, from the parking lot, getting into the door, to being able to read forms, maps, trailhead signs. There's a lot of different ways that accommodations happen. One of the important things to know is that there are some federal guidelines on what makes things accessible. When Eric was showing pictures of those boardwalks, there's guidelines on how wide a boardwalk can be, how far the boards can be spaced apart, all meant to give us some kind of baseline level of what's accessible and what's not accessible. Final thing to keep in mind about accommodations is that they're meant to allow for accessibility and they're supposed to be reasonable. So there's something called fundamental alterations. It's a legal term. What it means is you don't have to change the very nature of what something is to make an accommodation. It's something that says, what's the upper limit, right? Do we have to put a ski lift or a chairlift up the side of Mount Everest, right? That changes it. It's actually probably impossible because of the limits of modern construction and whether there's, even the possibility of putting that ski lift up the side of Mount Everest. In a policy world, when you talk about rules and regulations, allowing wheelchair users to use a trail, a reasonable accommodation, doesn't change the nature of the trail. Allowing somebody to use a gas-powered ATV to get down a rough trail, a little bit past the line, right? That may change the nature and the use of that trail. So there's limits to what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. That being said, our job is not to be limiting this evening. I just want to kind of give that reference so we know where the contours of the law are. And with that, I want to move to the next slide and start to open up the discussion. So if we want to switch the mic button, now's the time to do that. And while we're doing that and everyone's kind of thinking about what they have to contribute and say, I want to put up on the screen the website for this project. That's https://pinelandsalliance.org/the Pinelands is for everyone, all spelled out with hyphens in between the words. That's up on your screen. Everyone who's registered for the site will get an email with a recording of tonight's session, so you don't have to scribble this down real fast if you didn't keep up. So with that, I want to open it up and see if we have anybody who's our brave first participant who has something to share about accessibility, whether that's the Pinelands or outdoor spaces generally.
This is Tracy Carcione. I've given this considerable thought.
Hi, Tracy. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I am a blind person. I do not live with anyone who drives. And one of the very first problems I have, I would love to get out in nature more, but most of them are not anywhere near any public transit. I saw one that was, it said, take the bus to thus and so, and then walk 2 miles. Like, so that's 4 extra miles, not gonna happen. And the other thing is that they often do not have addresses that I could give to a taxi or an Uber or something. It's like, go to the end of the disposal road and then, do this and do that. And I don't really want to go someplace where I'm not sure the driver's going to go to the right place and find myself on the other side of the highway, That's my first problem.
That's a big one, right, Tracy? That's a big one. If you can't get someplace by public transportation, or you get dropped off and you don't know if you're in the right place and your Uber driver takes off on you, I could see how that's a big concern.
Mm-hmm.
You said that's your first one. Did you have a second thing to add to that? I want to make sure you get a chance.
Well, once I've found the trailhead, then, I've had guide dogs who are quite good at finding the way back. So I can walk up the trailhead and have a great time and then turn around and say, okay, girl, forward. And she'll go back to the end of the trailhead. And that was great. It just doesn't happen as much as I would like.
I appreciate you sharing that. Those are 2 good points, right? One successful thing is making sure that if you use a guide dog, that the guide dog can accompany you on your hike, and that's a successful thing. And the challenge that you're talking about is accessibility as far as transportation to get to that trailhead if you're looking to hike or walk on a trail. I appreciate you sharing both of those.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead. Is this Maureen?
Hi, my name is Maureen Regan, and I have a not-for-profit, Green Art Urban Gardens. And I have 2 comments, and maybe you could shed some light. The first one is, a few years ago, I proposed to New York City parks to have a sensory garden for people of all abilities in Flushing, Queens. And they told me that they love the idea, that I should go to Community Board 7 here and ask them for permission, that I'd need permission from the Community Board first. So I did that, and they rejected the idea of a sensory garden because they said I need to find a space somewhere else because children might interfere with other people in the park. And so my question on that is, did I have any recourse under the disability law? And the second comment I have is that I work for National Park Service out in Jamaica Bay, and I find that the paths to the trailheads are not accessible, and that's federal land. Are they mandated to make those accessible, wheelchair accessible?
So 2 great points, Maureen. And the first one's going to get a disclaimer. I'm really sorry about this. I'm a licensed lawyer in New Jersey, and I'm very, very hesitant about giving any kind of legal advice about what your recourse might be on a particular problem in a public forum. So no offense meant by that. And I could encourage anyone, Disability Rights New Jersey is drnj.org. We have sister agencies all over the nation. There's a Disability Rights New York, who would also probably be happy to talk to you about accessibility concerns.
Okay.
And thanks, Becky. You just put our web address in our chat box. So if anyone wants to take a look, any specific concerns like that, it's not a good idea for confidentiality to talk too much in a public forum. So I'll steer you that way. But generally speaking, though, you raise a pretty good question about the mandate to make things accessible. So the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, has been with us since 1991. And it makes me feel really old, but that's 30 years ago. That being said, the way that the ADA was written, the way that Congress kind of laid out the requirements for compliance was that a lot of things that were built or constructed before the ADA went into place weren't necessarily required to become accessible until they were modified or updated. So for example, if a street was repaved, that's when the sidewalks around that street had to be made accessible with curb ramps. If you look at a sidewalk from the 1980s, you're almost guaranteed to find that it ends in a square curb that no one could roll a wheelchair over. But if you look at a sidewalk that's been poured since then, much more likely to find that it comes with, the red squares that are raised for bumps for somebody who might be using a cane. You'll see that it's sloped in an appropriate way that somebody with a wheelchair could roll up and down it without a problem. Or you might see that maybe somebody kind of skirted the lawn, didn't pour it the right way. That being said, if a trail is in existence from before, then it may not be required to be brought up to date until something changes about it, like some kind of renovation. It's a general concept. Some parks have, like we heard from Eric in Atlantic County, gone proactive, right? We have trails that we may not have necessarily had to bring up to speed, but we got some funding to do it. So we took the proactive approach on it.
Hi, could I speak?
Please, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, your name's off my screen, but go ahead.
That's all right. My name is Ann Marie Woods, and I'm a Pinelands advocate. I'm a photographer, and I'm also the mother and advocate for a disabled adult my son, who's a wheelchair user and is also visually impaired. And we live in a Pinelands village for 20 some years now. So I live with the challenges of having raised a child in the Pinelands and being out there every day. I'm very aware. I remember when my older son was young, we would take him would unload the handicap van, and my son would be standing and wanting to run out there. And then I'd get my younger son off the lift, and we would be standing on the pavement, and we couldn't go out into the sand, or I couldn't push him into the grass because he had the small front wheels and the thin back wheels. And people would ask me what it was like. And I said, well, it's a unique experience because he experiences the world in terms of sound, the birds tweeting, and essentially we've turned our property and our home into a sanctuary for him. But what's unique is that often where you'll see handicapped individuals is at a mall or in an urban environment where they can get around, or in a park that has a lot of impermeable surfaces. And the challenge with the Pinelands is to create a handy accessible environment where you're impacting the environment as little as possible as well. But what I used to say when my son was young and I watched my older son run off onto the grass was, I said, the world doesn't end on the edge of the pavement, but we do, we stop there. And I fully understand the challenges of some of the access, especially when you're going over a small bridge, when you're parking in a handicap spot, or the handicap spot might be very soft. And I think the biggest thing is the transitions in the historic villages. When you've got the sandy roads, it works because that is what our soil is. But for a wheelchair, it's extremely challenging. Another thing, yesterday, we have Facebook pages that deal with the Pinelands, and they're great because people communicate, they share ideas, they ask questions. One of the main questions yesterday is, I'm a disabled person and I'd like to enjoy the pines. Can anyone give me a suggestion for where I can go and get out of my car with my scoliosis? That he was self-identified as someone with scoliosis. And that before it's too painful for me to walk, that I could go somewhere where I could see scenery and possibly, I believe, photograph it. And it reminded me, because I had a similar experience on my website, photography website, where someone out of the blue, who was also a photographer, disabled, said, is there anywhere where I can pull up my car with a view so that I can take beautiful pictures? I'm reaching out to you as a fellow photographer, because I haven't been able to find anywhere that deals with how a disabled person is supposed to relate to the Pinelands environment when they've never been there before. So when I saw that yesterday, I was so glad that I had registered for this seminar, that I could share with you that there are disabled individuals that are reaching out on Facebook pages and social media and asking for assistance, because there's a need to consolidate it across the counties, across the villages, and get it out there for ecotourism and also for accessibility wherever possible. And thank you for having the seminar tonight.
Anne Marie, thanks for sharing that. I think that hits the nail right on the head on why we want to be having this conversation and be having focused, conscientious work towards those goals, right? I want to go somewhere where I can take a few steps out of my car and see something beautiful and take a picture of it and just enjoy, or hear the sounds of nature, or get past the edge of that park. Like those places, some of them do already exist, but they may not be easy to find, or you may not be able to know it unless you're connected to the right place, or you know it yourself by chance. So hopefully those are some of the products that we can come up with from this project to address some of those needs, or identify that, right? That's the first thing that came to my mind when Carlton from the Pinelands Alliance reached out. I thought, well, geez, there's so much sand in the Pinelands, and it's that soft, squishy sand. Rolling a wheelchair has got to be a nightmare. If you have any kind of, if you use any kind of a walker or cane, it's got to be a nightmare to walk around. So I appreciate you sharing both of those things.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. And I agree about Forsyth. And also Cedar Bridge Tavern in Barnegat has a small trail that you can access for a historic property in Ocean County Park system.
Thank you. That's good for a good reference.
You're welcome.
Hello. My
Hi,
name
Ellen.
is Ellen Littenstein. How are you?
Fine. Thanks, Ellen. Go ahead.
Good. The dunes in Margate have presented a large problem for anyone with a handicap. I'll include others too in that, just for reference. The elderly have been cut off from the ocean now. It's impossible to get past the dunes. The issue I have, first of all, I should mention to everyone that the beach is considered a park in New Jersey. So although it's not what you typically think of as a park, it is considered a park. The major issue right now, although there are many, is that there are no handicap spaces anywhere along the beach for a person to be able to get out of their car onto the walk-through access points that they do have at some of the beaches and over the dune. I don't even know where to start, but I know that they're not in compliance, and I don't know how to fight with them, the mayors and the commissioner. I did mention it to one, and he actually took two giant Mother May I steps into my face and said, "I'm going to paint the big blue box in front of your house first." And I said, "Great." I mean, that if you know how busy the shore gets in the summer, you want to save a spot for us, that's wonderful. So he didn't succeed in threatening me, but this is a major issue. What do I do?
Yeah, Ellen, I'm glad that you weren't bullied in that situation, even though there was an attempt at bullying you. So that's good to stand up. For specifics, I would suggest reaching out to Disability Rights New Jersey. Actually, one of my colleagues I saw in the call, Maritza, is kind of my go-to person for advice on handling those kind of situations. She's an expert. So you can reach out to us for some specifics on what you could do in that case. I think that's handicap parking and accessible parking spots has been something that we all have gotten used to seeing. I think one of the earlier speakers talked about, the mall, right? Everybody knows that you can go to the mall or shopping center and find the right number of accessible spots, the blue square. But that doesn't always apply in smaller parking lots or places where there is no parking lot, but there's a public facility nearby. So you bring up a pretty interesting point. And I think even if you look at those, I was telling you about the federal guidelines for accessibility. When you read the federal guidelines, if you ever go and check them out, they're easy to Google and find, you can tell that they're built for people who work in office buildings or who want to access office buildings and shops. You have to do a little bit of creative interpretation to think even about how that might work for a public park or trail or a beach, a lake, a dock. You have to think creatively to see how they apply. They do, but it's definitely not what the drafters were exactly thinking about when they were writing up and drawing their graphs and their pictures and their measurements. So thanks, Ellen. I appreciate you taking some time to share with us.
I wanted to say rail trails are great too, often because they're very compacted surfaces, and they put a lot of cinder on them, maybe like 18 to 24 inches deep. So it's still a permeable surface, but you can ride a bike or use a wheelchair on them. So that's a place that we've had it. There are good things. It's not all depressing. It can actually be quite wonderful and creative. And it's a good way to meet people too. So I just wanted to say that. The Barnegat Rail Trail's out. So I see the Jason saying the Atlantic County Rail Trail, and I can add that the Barnegat Rail Trail is also very nice. A little bit out of the Pinelands, but it's a combination of bay, and a lot of the bay areas, bay beaches have access to. So there are a lot of good places to go.
That's good. That's a good thing. Anne Marie, when we start building up this database and filling in some of the blanks, I'm going to ask you, I'm kind of charging you here to come back and submit some of these places that you know about so that others can access them too, who need that access.
Directly to Carlton or to Becky, or?
I think we're going to figure out how we collect that information. When we do, we're going to reach back out to you. I'm writing your name down right now, Anne Marie.
I have a suggestion.
Victoria, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I do this. I just moved down here from New York, though. In New York, Syracuse University was a boatload of money from the state to basically do a recreation access guide. They trained people to go and actually do assessments, including things like a 36-inch tablecloth to figure turning radius. That was pretty cool. Handmade tilt measures. And this was not only for public facilities and parks, but also things like gyms. It was a really good guide. Are there blue line spaces? Are they adequate for actually offloading a chair? Because sometimes that's, not really considered. And it turned out everybody was always concerned about mobility issues whenever there were discussions, but there are many, 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 many other considerations involved. So I threw into the chat at one point intellectual and developmental disabilities. One thing that we found was paths that had actually a stripe of paint along each side defined where you're supposed to walk for people. I wrote wayfinding too. Sometimes people can't really figure out what those trail signs are all about, and definitely the point about access in terms of public transportation and all, that's a big one. I'm used to getting on my bike and going places. It don't work that way down here. Another thing is kayaks. Kayak launches should be accessible. And I don't think there are any in the Pinelands that actually have rollers for launch. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to point out is if any of the local universities have a disability studies program, they got students that need stuff to work on. And you can throw all kinds of wonderful little projects at them. So that's basically what I had to throw out there. My master's is in disability studies, and my thesis was on neuroarchitecture in connection with the ADA. So.
Victoria, that's great. That's fantastic stuff. And I think you and I are probably on the same page because, like I said, my first thought when we were talking about accessibility in the Pinelands, I thought deep sand. Oh my God, deep sand. Yeah. But then, I tried to make sure, and if anyone here got the outreach, whether through the ARC, through the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, or through the Bog Center over at Rutgers, we had tried to, beat the drum to make sure we heard from different folks from different communities, because if you know one person with a disability, you know one person with a disability, right? Everybody's got everyone's got their own thing, right? Everyone's a unique individual. So I would really encourage, if anyone in the crowd is coming from that perspective, we've talked a little bit about mobility. There's plenty of other disabilities where accommodations will be necessary to really enjoy the outdoor spaces. So I want to encourage anyone there to speak up if they can.
The other thing is, just to make it interesting, bear in mind that anything should be sustainable ultimately.
Right. Yeah. Doing it once and letting it fall apart doesn't help too long. Yeah.
I would like to speak.
Charlotte, please go ahead.
So I have a story. So we went to Baxter Village, and some of the places were accessible. Me and my younger brother travel around in power wheelchairs, and some of the spaces where we're driving, they have a lot of sand where they are. And while we're driving around, we would get stuck in the sand in places. And my mom and my sister would try and have to like push us to get us out of where we were. So, yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is Kim, Charlotte's mom. When you were talking about the other disabilities, we do deal with the wheelchair issues, because they're pretty significant in a lot of places. But the one thing that came to mind when you were talking is bathrooms. If you have somebody with a disability who cannot go into a restroom unattended, and you are a woman with a male person, it is a real problem. So making sure that there is, like a family bathroom, so that you can accompany that person in. I mean, that is a huge issue. And if somebody is less physically able than my two children, and they use a wheelchair, then having a changing station or something where you're not putting a person on the floor of a restroom that is probably, less than clean. I think that is really important.
That's a good point. Thanks, Charlotte. And Charlotte's mom, I didn't get your name. I'm sorry. Kim. Thanks, Charlotte and Kim. I appreciate both of you speaking up. And I'm sure that any of us who have, seen different bathrooms out in the Pines, it's a wide spectrum from pristine and beautiful to how does this kept so clean out here to, I'm gonna find another time or place. Yeah. So that's a matter of convenience for some. It's a matter of necessity for others. So I think that's a valid point. I don't want to laugh at it, but I've seen places where I completely agree with what you're saying. You couldn't use it if you needed an attendant, either too small, too dirty, inaccessible for a lot of different reasons. So good point there on bathrooms. Thanks.
I have a question.
Gina, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, my name is Gina Provenzano. I'm wondering if, and this may sound silly, but if Braille is still the standard for visually impaired people, because I work in state parks and we do interpretive signage and trails brochures and interpretive brochures for parks. And I'm thinking that we would like to get some of those put into Braille if that's what the acceptable medium is. And if anybody knows of a company that we could find that would do that and they could drop it in the chat, that would be helpful. We're just never sure if that's still the current medium that it should be in. If we had Braille and flat text on an interpretive sign panel to tell people what lives in a pond or birds might be seen here, those types of things.
Hi, my name is Kim Borgerson. I just spoke a moment ago, but I'm a retired teacher from the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And there is one office in each of the regions, and they would be a resource for you. I'm sure somebody there could talk. Braille is definitely still a valid medium. And they would be able to help hook you up with resources or people who could help develop the materials that you're looking for. So you would just look up New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and then whichever region you're in, there's 3 offices.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Also, I've seen some, like, I forgot what it was, but it was like a state or national park app. And it said, okay, you are here. And then it would read you what was supposed to be on the sign there. It was pretty good.
Right, using a technological solution to, make sure that those interpretive signs out in nature are accessible to everybody. That's definitely a good use of technology. And I also appreciate Kim jumping in there. That's fantastic. I think that this is a good forum for us to help each other find those kind of solutions for things. Sometimes our collective knowledge is more than any one of us knows by ourselves. So thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, Victoria adds, as long as you have cell service, yeah, that is a key, unless it's something you can pre-record with a GPS. That would be important to have that cell service. All I'm trying to keep up with the chat too, so I'm going to take a quick second just to look at the chat. In the meantime, nobody should hesitate. If you want to jump in, please go ahead and do so. I'm just going to see if we missed anything big in the chat box for a second.
Hello.
Hi, Crystal.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to share the toll-free number to the New Jersey Commission for the Blind for the individual who spoke about Braille earlier. If you would like that number, it's 1-877-685-8878. And you can leave a message on the toll-free number with any needs that you might inquire about, whether it's Braille, vocational rehab, independent living, orientation and mobility. And just as the other retiree mentioned earlier, there are 3 regional service offices throughout the state. And there's also a network of support groups that you can connect with, which is called the Aspire Peer Support Network. And it's coordinated by Susan Venino. So there's a lot of great information, and even amidst the pandemic, everyone is still working remotely to help New Jersey residents.
Thanks, Crystal. It's valuable information. And I'm going to see if you don't mind. Oh, it's there. Becky's just right on top of it. She's already got it in the chat. Thank you, Becky.
This is Maritza with DrNJ. I'm
Hey, Maritza.
Happy to be on here and hearing all of these things. I have to say that I've been with the agency, our organization, for many, many years, and I can recall having 2 complaints. Not even so much complaints, but what can I do? And it's been so many years, but one gentleman had an issue regarding being able to access the water. He had a boat and was having problems getting his boat into the water and then being able to get down to it and get on there. And one other one was around a family that their child needed a certain type of flotation device, which was not allowed at this particular lake because of safety issues, but it was the only type that she could use. So right there entered the accommodation for this specific child. But I am sure we'll be hearing a lot more after this this meeting. So just feel free to give us a call.
Absolutely. And Maritza's my go-to for accessibility questions. She's been doing it for quite a while and knows a lot of the tricks of the trade, how to make accommodations requests that really work if you've got specific problems. So I'm gonna advertise her and make her real busy. I'm taking a look at the clock, and my official clock is reading 7:56 p.m. So that means we only have a couple of minutes left. If anyone else wants to jump in, just go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I want to say something about what, like, for the deaf and hard of hearing committee.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now better?
Perfect, Yvette. Go ahead.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. Thank you. So it was just about, I can't think of any related accessibility barrier, like because it's hearing loss. But just in terms of, like, some people also are interested in volunteering and in being, and then there might be a barrier, like with communication as volunteers. So that, like, I'm thinking that collaborating with other organizations where we can together provide those opportunities for youth and for other people who enjoy nature and want to be volunteers too, and that we could provide interpreting support for those who want to volunteer.
And I think, Yvette, you just brought up a great point, right? We've talked a lot of what we're talking about is accessing the pines for recreation, and it seems to be kind of a common theme, like, you know, viewing nature, hiking around in nature. But many of us experience the pines in a different way, like volunteering. I think that it was Jason who was saying from the Pinelands, like, that he was clearing some space and making a river accessible for canoes, right? So like that's part of, he was talking about how therapeutic that was. And we were just having that conversation earlier today. And it just reminds me that, you know, sometimes going to work or volunteer to do trail maintenance, to clear a river from fallen trees, that's also something that some of us take for granted that maybe with a different disability may be difficult or impossible. So that's a great point, Yvette. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's not all just play. Sometimes it's work.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have 2 minutes left. So before I get in our last word, I want to have my last word just because, I don't know, I guess I can. If you thought this session was a good place to share your thoughts about barriers to accessibility in the Pinelands, I would really encourage you to stay tuned. We're going to be announcing 2 more town halls over the course of the year. You know, we're going to probably adjust the themes based on what we hear at this first town hall. We all want to make sure that we hear from a diverse or as diverse as possible group of people to tell us, you know, their thoughts and what works, what doesn't, the barriers that are out there. So if you know somebody who maybe couldn't make this town hall because their schedule, or maybe they just didn't hear about it in time, please spread the word, invite your friends, relatives. If you're somebody who has a disability, we especially want to hear from you. But if you're somebody who's a family member with a disability, if you work with people with disabilities, if you're an advocate for people with disabilities, we want to hear what you have to say, because I think that without your voices kind of steering the work of this project over the course of the next year, there's a good chance that we miss something big. I think I've got a legal pad here where I was taking notes on what you're all saying, and I've managed to fill up 2 pages with notes, and I would say a good 75% of these are things that, at least for me, didn't cross my mind, even though I'm a disability lawyer. So I really think it was valuable for us. And with that, I'm actually looking at the time. I took up the last 2 minutes. I'm sorry. It's 8 o'clock. But I'm willing to stay on for a minute or two. If anyone else has a final word they want to jump in with before we sign off.
Thank you.
Good evening. If I can say something quickly, my name's John Smith. I'm Superintendent of Parks for Burlington County.
Hey, John.
And this is terrific for me to hear. You know, I have a very limited breadth of experience, I guess, as we all do. And hearing from those that encounter barriers in our park system is very important to us. An email to our web address, our common parks website, our email address is very important. It lets us know where there are barriers that we can work on. So it's important for us to get that information from our users. So we welcome those comments anytime anyone finds a problem in Burlington County Parks.
John, that's awesome. Thanks so much for offering. And hopefully, again, what we generate out, our written portion of our report here, is something that might be really beneficial to folks like you, right? People who manage these kind of spaces, who have the ability and the willingness to make some changes to make our outdoor spaces more welcoming for everybody. And with the right information and a good guidance, again, from these town halls, where we hear from you, the public, that will help steer those efforts and those dollars into the places where they're most effective, where they're most needed. With that, it's my tradition to always run every webinar exactly 2 minutes over time. It's 2 minutes after the hour. I want to thank everybody. I especially want to thank the Pinelands Preservation Alliance and Hopeworks for making this town hall possible, for inviting me to talk. I've been talking a whole bunch. They've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I want to thank them for inviting me. And most especially, I want to thank all of you. It's a Tuesday evening. You're busy. There's a lot of stressful things happening in the world still. And you took some time to come and share your thoughts, your concerns, your suggestions with us. That's like I said,